Jack, James is with you, right? James Hornet?
James, can you hear me? I can barely hear you. James is joining us in case there's something we want to talk about, but yes.
We were just confirming and attending. I thought it was with you. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'll call the Special Regional Council meeting to order. Please be advised that tonight's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually and is being streamed and recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Roper, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. Petitions, delegations. Mr. Jack McQuaig. Welcome back, Mr. McQuaig.
Thank you.
Tonight we're dealing with engineering steps for the town squares condition assessment. Would you like to start your presentation?
Okay, I'll jump right in. And do I have the ability to share screen? Yes.
You do.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So I assume you can all see my screen, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this presentation relates to the latest missive report we sent out, which essentially covers the next steps in the, I guess, the ongoing repairs and upgrades to the town hall. No, it's not letting me page. Hang on. There we go. So once again, I'm not sure if everybody remembers me because I have been here before, but my name is Jack McQuaig. I'm with McQuaig & Associates Engineering. Our initial report included several different consultants, specifically AES and Structural Solutions and Jensen Hughes. Today, it's just myself presenting and essentially going into the next steps after we've done the initial survey and assessment. I want to just say up front that our specialty is assessment and reconstruction. We don't usually just do assessments. We are very much involved in the design and specification of reconstruction projects. So as much as I like to toot my own horn, I can very much assure everybody that yes, we do this work all the time. And the idea is where we are now and what we should be doing next. So in the previous report, we'd sent out this project timeline, which you can see was presented. And essentially, you are here is where we were the last time I presented a report. We're now into stage 5 or 6, engage stakeholders and hire consultants. And at that point, we can go in and implement the changes, which is stage 7, and then enjoy your building. So engaging stakeholders, how and why, and what you should be looking for from your consultant is really what I'd like to talk to today. During the previous report, we had a table of repairs, and forgive me if I've made this table much smaller, but for the sake of discussions, these are the basic repairs that are required. Now, each one of these has several different subcategories and everything else, but in the grand scheme of things, we've broken it up into the major components, some of which have very few, some of which have a lot. And for example, interior lists only flooring. That's because there's a lot of other interior work, but clearly flooring is only interior and doesn't cut across to electrical, mechanical, or accessibility or anything like that. So the full list is in the report, and of course I urge everybody to read the report in its entirety, but that's where we should go. So the first question any consultant trying to give guidance or help on where we should go next will be, how will you use this building? What is it you really want the building to do? And of course, you'll immediately come back with, well, how can we use the building? What's available? What's possible? What isn't possible? And that's one of the important roles of the consultant. So at this point, I may just pause the whole presentation, and during the design consultation process, this is an ongoing process. But I just like to ask the question of the council in general, are you considering selling the building? Or if you are not selling the building, are we just going to proceed and do all of the repairs? And this is, I can pause now if you want to discuss it, but essentially this is a really important question.
So, Mr. McQuaig, I don't think that's been brought before council, the option of selling the building, at least not in the short term. Councillors, do you have any comment on that? Councillor Souls.
Yeah, well, from a conceptual point of view, I think that we haven't discussed this in detail as a council ourselves, but the my general feel of it is this, that you have a building, it's very much like a machine of other forms. I work in the world of machines, you work in the world of buildings. You can't sell something that's broken down. You can't actually recover any value out of something that is no longer functional if it has a function, a normal function. And so, to some degree, whether we sell or continue to use this as the council chambers and as the Center for the Northern Rockies, I think that either way, we should be ready to start spending some money on making this building in condition so that we either can move it or we can use it for a long period of time.
Any other comments from councillors? Councillor Gerwing.
So, sorry, I can't look at you because if I look away from the microphone, then you won't be able to hear me. So I'm not like being rude. So I read the report, and there's a lot of unknowns. Obviously, no walls were ripped down. Like there's a lot of deficiencies, and there's a lot of money that needs to be spent. But it could be even greater than what we know at this time. On the flip side of that, from my perspective, is if we didn't do something, we can't sell it. I think we all agree with that. It's not going to get sold. And we can't just leave it sitting here as being in disrepair. We have tenants, plus it would just be another eyesore in our community, right? So, you know, it's really hard to make a decision when there's so much unknown about what possibly needs to be repaired. That's kind of where I'm sitting right now. I'm kind of conflicted as to the next step forward.
Councillor Roper.
Yeah, I think we have some options in front of us, but we'll have less options if we don't start to reinvest in the building now. There's definitely things we can do with it or not do with it. We can continue as a town hall. We could move town hall somewhere else, sell the building, or repurpose the building for something we don't even know what it could be. But I think at the end of the day, we are still occupying this building. As Councillor Gerwing said, we're very much connected to the tenants in this building. This building is very much the heart and soul of the town right now, other than the rec center. So yeah, it would be my decision if it was up to me to do some remediation on the building, and then we can look at those options down the line.
Very well. So that is sort of, Councillor Gerwing, did you have another comment? Go ahead.
Could I just respond to what Councillor Roper had to say? Have you given consideration to what level? Because there were different levels presented in the report. So did your thinking include to what level you would like to see the remediation take place, or have you got that far in your thinking?
Yeah, I can't recall the levels off the top of my head, but I think there were some immediate things that needed to be done in the $3 to $4 million range. And then I think the 20-year outlook was what, 15 million, 7 to 7 million, right? So I think now is a good time to deal with those immediate things, to keep the building safe, to keep it functional. And we have some time right now to investigate grant opportunities and see what we can get paid for. So I think there's a lot we can do, but those immediate things, those things that we have to do in the next 5 years, is what I have in mind. And then there's more to do beyond that. But yeah.
Councillor Penny?
I'm really torn. I am. I just fear that if we put 3 to 4 million into this to do the immediate things, then we're pretty much pot committed, right? We're 50% of what needs to be spent will already be spent. So I think that's, once the decision is made to go ahead and spend that money, then that's it. As we were told by, here quite a while ago, before we spend any money, we need to come up with what our actual plan is. So if our plan is to continue to keep this building and move forward, then that's the way we need to go. But if we don't see it happening in 10 years, then we need to make that decision pretty quick before we spend $3 or $4 million on a building that we're new with.
Mr. Souls and then Mr. Barry.
I just would like to just add to it, though, that when I heard and we went through the report before on the various stages and the overall $7 million, that is actually repair and maintenance and bring up to speed an existing facility. It's worthy to compare that with building a new facility that provides tenancy and all sorts of things that we would have, and realize that that's a very cost-effective mechanism of doing it if we can maintain it for the long term. But if we can't maintain it for the long term and keep tenancy going, then it may be good money thrown after bad money.
Mr. Barry.
Mayor, so the intent tonight obviously is for council to make that decision. When we met with Jack, asked Jack to have a bit of a pause so council can have the dialogue to get your thoughts and start thinking about that. Tonight, Jack will outline the next what steps are going to look like, and it'll take into consideration, of course, those future discussions of council into what level you would reinvest in the building and at what stages and all those things. But the intent was to get this discussion started also, because one of the things that hasn't occurred with council is a true decision in terms of what to do with the building, and all the facts haven't been laid out, all the information hasn't been there yet, and this is the kind of the start of this for council, but it's also to start thinking about, because I think back in the day, and the reason why this got initiated at the start, or it was previous council discussion was, keep the building functioning, don't put any money into it, that was the direction, and then look for something new. And that necessarily is not the best answer based on when you start looking at all the facts and what all the different options may or may not be based on reinvesting. As Councillor Soul said, purchasing a new building is just that. You have to purchase it, but it's not set up to function as a town hall. So then there's additional costs that are significant costs to go into that to have the functionality of it. And in addition, you can't just walk away from this place as is the way it is. So you have to reinvest into the building to make it useful. You're not going to turn around and board it up, for example. So that's the reason why we kind of had that pause as part of this. And Jack, once he gets into the rest of the presentation, we wanted this council to start thinking about that as we're discussing what those next steps may be.
Thank you. I guess, Mr. McQuaig, my ideas on this are maybe not along the lines of some of the other councillors. I kind of like the idea of run to fail, and when carpet needs to be replaced, it's replaced. But as far as things like sprinkler systems go and $2 million heating air conditioning systems, that's where I start to balk a little bit at the cost. So, I note in town here we've got a couple of buildings that have been here for a long time, like for instance our banks, and I don't believe either one of them has a sprinkler system in it, nor do I think that they have any intentions of putting that in. And I'm kind of along the lines of, eventually you get to a point where things need to be replaced, like windows, carpets, perhaps outlets or things need to be upgraded and put in. But to expend a huge amount of money on something that, as Mr. Soul said, you might get to the end of the line and have something that is not worth the money that you put into it is a bit of a concern to me. But certainly open to hearing the rest of your comments on this. So I'll turn it over to, I'll ask for Mr. Roper's comments here first.
And just one more point to that. I think the things you just described that the building needs, these are things that any building is going to need at any given, when it's been used for a significant amount of time. So if we went out and bought a building tomorrow, we're not going to plan in 30 years to abandon that building and go for a new one. That's just not how it works. And I just don't see the point in salting the earth and burning the crops here when, we could fix it up and potentially do a sale later to someone we haven't even thought of and possibly make that investment back or more. So I think, my feeling at this point is, you know, let's keep this building in decent shape at least.
Thank you. Mr. McQuaid.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate the input, and I think from my end, one of the reasons I wanted to pause is to throw it back at council, at least to let them know that they are driving the bus. It doesn't really matter what I say. At the end of the day, he who has the gold makes the rules. That is the golden rule. So what you decide is how we will move forward. And my presentation today is really just a methodology of moving forward. And one quick answer to a question that was thrown out, that we did crunch some numbers in the previous report. The cost of repairs are just over 7 million, and the cost of replacement is over 3 times that. So if you spend $7 million and get a $21 million building, then there is value in it. But regardless of that, I shall now continue where we paused. And as we move forward, any repairs or upgrades or changes will be an iterative process. And I'm going to start in the top left, and you can start almost anywhere, but you identify the potential use of the building. And the potential use of the building could start with, we just want to use it for what we're using it for today, or we want to do different things. So then you set the requirements, and you work with consultants to identify, well, if you want to do that, well, we should just do this. That then gets passed down to the bottom right, and we examine the ramifications, and we say, okay, if this is your plan, we can do that. It will cost X. It will have these ramifications. This will work well. This will work not so well. This is good. You can't do that. You can do this. And then you go through, and then you get back to the consultant and say, okay, we like that. Oh, but if it doesn't let us do this, how about if we make that change? And we go around the circle again and again and again. And it's really important to know that no decision you make really will cast things in stone where you can't move forward from it. Each decision will slowly narrow you down to what you would like to do best at the end. And that's the intent of the process. So how we define the work is of course the $1 million question. And we basically pulled out 4 important capabilities that the building must have: safety, failure risk, comfort, and marketability. Now, as much as failure risk, well, safety, everyone probably really understands right off the hop. What level of safety is always a gray area, as someone alluded to. Do we need sprinklers right away? You know, do we have to have a high-end alarm system? What about the older one? Is it good enough? All those questions are open to discussion, but someone has to make a call as to how safe is safe. Failure risk is what is the risk of not replacing a component right now before the end of its expected service life? So, for example, if we were in Antarctica and you said, well, I'm going to run my heaters until failure, I would strongly be opposed to that, because like it or not, you're in the middle of nowhere and the heater is an essential service and you cannot run to failure for something like that. But other things you can run to failure, and there's lower risk. So that has to be assessed. Comfort includes not just, isn't it nice that we have good air conditioning in the summer and good heat in the winter? Comfort is everything about how the building works, about whether it's reasonable to work through there. You can be effective as you work, even down to the paint colors and everything. And all of that falls into comfort. And it also crosses over into the next one, marketability, because marketability is important as well. Even if you're never planning on selling the building does exist, and it's in the middle of the community, and it does have to have some marketability. So once we decide those 4 criteria, then we assign rankings and priority to each of the items that were outlined in our previous report as required repairs. And each repair, we talked with staff, and we did discuss, and we assigned values to each of them. And the values, basically, a priority was whether it's definitely needed, strongly desired, or just would be nice. And urgency falls into now, ASAP, when other issues require it or can wait. And if you'll notice, number 5 is a different color, because even though something isn't really that important to do, but it's required to allow us to do something that's an urgency 1, then number 5 can then suddenly jump up to number 1. So as an example, certain things must be grouped together. So this is just a typical example. If you look at the fire alarm system, the sprinklers, and the fire separation, well, that all falls under fire and safety. So that should be done. But if you want to do that work, well, then we have to start opening the walls to get access to the sprinklers, or put new sprinklers in, and to get access to the alarm system. Well, when the walls are open, you really should be doing the branch wiring at the same time, and the emergency lighting, because again, they all tie in together. And so then you're doing the HVAC service, the branch wiring. So suddenly all those items get tied together, and the mechanical then gets split off, because the HVAC, although it's tied into what has to be done inside the walls, the hot water tanks, for example, no, they can be done any separate time. So that gets pulled up and put into a later phase. So we try to break things into different categories that make sense from a phasing standpoint. In our report, we broke it into several different phases, and as an example, we called it envelope 3, envelope 2, envelope 1, interior work 2. All of these phases were based on our risk assessment and time frame assessment. I don't know if you can see this that well on your screen, but for example, the communication system was given a priority A, but a time frame 3. And then lower down, we have priority A and time frame 2. On the envelope, we have some priority D and a time frame 4. So that's why it's under envelope 2 instead of envelope 1. Each of these now gets broken into reasonable phases that should be done together. And which one is the most important right now, you can kind of give a scoring value. The scoring value we gave it, it's an attempt to be organized and scientific through it. And we worked with the staff to go over those. And we ended up with these phases. The interior 1 phase cost $3.8 million. I realize that's a big number, but it picks up a lot of the really big things that should be done soon. Then we have interior 2, we're just under $1 million. Envelope 1, envelope 2, you can see all the numbers all the way down. Envelope 3 is 1.6. That would pick up the roof. That's a major component there, which clearly can wait several years. The roof doesn't have to be done right away. But all of these can be shifted around, and the priority for each of them is not necessarily in that order. In fact, this is not cast in stone. They can be changed, and they probably will. And to be blunt, we don't have enough information or feedback directly from council as to what they want to do and what their priorities are and how they want to achieve this. And with more information and going around that circle I alluded to earlier several times, this will get much more refined and a much better idea about exactly what the most important priorities are, and then it can be improved to a much better breakdown. In terms of timeline and procurement, this is similar to the timeline we had earlier, although I've just rejigged it based on where we are today. So stage 1 is you're hiring a consultant. And I'm not the only consultant in the world that can do this work. As I said, we're very good at it, I think anyway. But once you have a consultant, stage 2 is engaging the stakeholders, and it's important to engage them. And I'll be going into each of these in more detail shortly. Once you've dealt with your stakeholders, you've got a consultant you're working with, and stakeholders, as much as I say the council drives the bus, there are other stakeholders that I would hope the council will talk to and get further information as necessary. Then deal with a consultant, shortlist some options, and then have a design brief basically on it. Once you know exactly or almost exactly what you want, then you can finalize what the design should look like. Then you can create a detailed design, and then you can explore the contract options to make that happen, and then procurement and construction. So phase 1 is hire the consultant, and to be honest, I've already been hired, or we've been hired, but the consultant must assemble a team to help provide options and to comment on proposed changes, cost, feasibility, etc. This consultant should assist with all later steps. Engage all stakeholders. This is the dangerous part to some extent, but this includes the council, the committees, and the public. Find out what all the stakeholders want or need from the town hall. And at this stage, the consultant can help to keep the wish list reasonable, realistic, and feasible. And I want to pause there and say that again. Keep the wish list realistic and feasible, because as soon as you open this up to all potential stakeholders, to be blunt, a lot of people who are not necessarily experienced in these sort of projects may want things or desire things which will be very difficult, very time consuming, very expensive. And I've seen projects where you end up down in the weeds fighting over small little items, and it's important to keep things in a realistic time frame about what we can and can't do and what our ideas are, what we're trying to achieve, and not go down dead ends for a long period of time. Having said that, though, if it's a good idea, even if it's over budget, you have every right to consider it. Once you shortlist your options, you create a short list of design options and determine pros and cons and cost benefit of each. So again, when you're dealing with the stakeholders and all stakeholders, then any option can be added to it. The consultant gives feedback of what the cost benefits of each of those options are, and then you can shortlist the options. When you finalize a design brief, at that point, you've been around that circle I've talked about a few times now. You've been around the circle enough times that you're saying, okay, this is what we want, and this is how we're going to move ahead. And from then, you can go prepare a detailed design. And the detailed design will include full drawings and specifications and everything like that. Contract options are wide open at present, of course. And so part of the contract options, I understand you would prefer using local hires. You should assist smaller contractors by materials purchase and agreements. You can sole source if you wish. And of course, this works well with the whole procurement process. So you can tailor make your contract to give preferential treatment to local contractors if you wish. And again, you're in charge here. And as you carry out the procurement, all of those items can then be spelled out in whatever detail is necessary. To meet local requirements, procurement must be flexible. So you can allow preferential scoring to encourage local contractors. You can provide assistance to financing via materials purchasing. I understand you've already done that on some projects we've been involved where the owners can do that. You can also allow alternatives to bonding. Some contractors may not have the ability to get the bonding that's normally required in public projects. It's important that everything's fair and everything's open to the public in general and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, as long as you remain flexible, all of these can be achieved. During the construction phase, the contractors carry out each phase of the work. Consultants assure that the standards are met, that work is adequate, and all of that. Energy upgrades, and this is something that I put off to the side, but I think it's important to bring it up, that energy upgrade studies can help you access funding for other upgrades. There are many different funding grants and or rebate programs available from the utilities, Fortis, BC Hydro, also from the government of Victoria. All of them have available money, and some of them, if you decrease greenhouse gas, some if you decrease the amount of gas you're using. There's all these marvelous methodologies, but it's important to know how you're using your energy and what studies you can do. Also, because we're making major changes, there will be questions as we go. For example, if you're upgrading your mechanical system, how energy efficient do you want to make it? If you're upgrading the envelope, the mechanical system can be smaller. So it's important to really understand how energy works in the building, because these repairs we're planning on doing, as someone alluded to earlier, this is a 30-year repair, and who knows what energy is going to cost in the future. And it's important that we look forward to what the operating cost of the building is. And energy is an operating cost that never seems to go down. Enjoy your building is phase 9, and I don't say that facetiously at all. And the reason I threw this in here, because I like the sign that said Phoenix, because frankly, if we do a lot of these repairs, or at least a significant number of them, the building is now coming back to some glory. It is a central building in the town. It is a focus of the town, and you can do anything you want with this building. And as a minimum, if you're just going to sell it, you should fix it up well enough to sell it. And again, that's a certainly viable strategy. Or you can add new things. And I think it's important after this phase to think about what you want to use the building for moving forward for the next 30 years. and that could include improved services. It could include services that are already there, for example, with a tenant, but you can upgrade things. You could upgrade this play school into a full-fledged daycare. You could change the library so it's much more data center and all this. You could do anything, put coffee shops in, who knows? All of this is available, and all of this, of course, everything has a cost and everything has a cost benefit. But I think it's important now to start thinking about what is this building going to be like, not today, or even in 5 years when you're done, but in the next 20 years. So that's why enjoy your building is important. So having said that, that was the end of my presentation, and I'm certainly open to questions.
Thank you. Councillor Gerwing.
Okay, can you still hear me if I turn this way?
Yes, I can still hear you.
Okay. So just a few comments. Communication, no matter what we decide, if we're going to do anything, communication has to get moved from that number 3, whatever, to like number 1 priority. These repairs be IDCA eligible?
So, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's something to remember too, right? And then,
Sorry, and just so you know, the funds that we put away in the reserve account for buildings, facilities, the majority of it was specific to either reinvesting in this town hall or another town hall, just because that we had to do that. So that's been clearly outlined with the province since day one of with the IDCA agreement.
and then my last comment is just like the time of the process. I mean, I know you can't sit here today and tell me if we made the decision today to move forward, would it be 18 months till construction started, or 3 months, or whatever. I'm just inquiring because I'm thinking about any ramifications of an election and a change in council. So something to consider in terms of timelines.
I can speak to timelines in very general terms. As an example, on one end of the spectrum, if you just said today, we will fix whatever's broken in the building, we will not change its use at all, we will bring it up to today's British Columbia Building Code, and that's it. I mean, that's very clear instructions. Those are easy to work on. We would then go away. Well, we wouldn't go away. We'd actually go north, do a little more experimentation, but we'd actually check into a few things. And we could certainly have our design fully finished within a few months, like this summer, absolutely, and then start work immediately. But, and here's the big but, you'll notice there was a re-roof in there. Well, the re-roof is in there because you're probably looking at it in 5 years' time, and frankly, replacing it this summer is pointless. Why? So there's some things that should definitely be delayed, and the roof is probably the one that's the biggest ticket item that you're pushing for down the road until you need it. But a realistic timeline to start work by the end of the summer is not a realistic timeline, because I think as soon as you're engaging stakeholders and everything else, the going around the circle part will take months. It should, and that part. But I think if you set a target and saying, look, we want to have a conceptual design by the end of the year, that's a realistic target, and I think that can be done. And then when you move forward, part of that conceptual design will say, we will replace the roof, and pick a date, 2026. And we will do the mechanical in 2023, or whatever you want. And again, we do have to prioritize everything on an as-needed basis. But some of the work, in my opinion, will take more than 5 years, or should take more than 5 years. And some of the work should start soon, for obvious reasons. And realistically, soon can be a number of months.
Great, thank you.
Are there any more questions for Mr. McQuaid? I guess one of the things that's a priority, Mr. McQuaid, is the safety of the employees of the municipality. We want to ensure that there are no dangers to the health and safety of the employees, which is foremost. Nothing's going to fall on them, or they're not going to get an electric shock from something. So we want to make sure that it's safe for our employees. Under that safety umbrella, there are different degrees of safety. For instance, the emergency lighting system, if there is a failure, sprinkler systems you identified as well, which are also safety items. But I'm thinking of more immediate concerns. I think you had identified some electrical issues that are something that are a bit of a concern to me, because we certainly don't want anybody to get injured. So, are there any more questions for Mr. McQuaid? Very well. Hearing none, thank you very much for your presentation today, and we will go away and we'll discuss this further.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Very well. Is there any more comments before I adjourn the meeting? Councillor Goering?
So what are next steps then for us?
Mr. Barry?
Obviously, we have some decisions to make, and just wondering how we're going to move forward and when the timeline for making those decisions is going to be.
We'll ask Mr. Barry that question.
It's up to council, actually. Next steps, I mean, we have Jack waiting to do something. When we chatted we wanted to give council an idea what a broad brush approach in terms of what the next steps or what things would look like. And now is to narrow it down for council and have council, so as Jack had said, is to provide some various options that council can say, let's, from a stepped approach. Again, sky's the limit for council. You can turn around and say, let's go do it all. Or let's take the stepped approach, look after safety, some immediate things that which we're already working on in the background and prepared to work on. And then throughout the process, you reevaluate it. So we'll bring more information back to council, and of course we're using Jack's guidance because he's the expert. We're not the experts in this. We'll provide as much information as you can. Council and say that we're the experts in this, because this is not what we prepared for. Was from a financial perspective, being a good financial. But in terms of new processes, where we're going to rely heavily on McQuaig's group to help navigate through the process.
Councillor Penny.
Can't remember. I remember seeing the numbers and hearing the numbers, but how much do we have in reserve now for? I don't have more than enough, right, to complete the whole project.
Yes, we're fine from that perspective. Yeah.
And then is there any limitations to us? Everybody says that it's all up to us, council, sky's the limit, but is there any limitation to us spending this $4 or $7 million without having to go to public for anything? No.
The funds are there.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's process in terms of financial. It's not like we're borrowing or anything like that. The funds are there and accessible, and again have been put into that account specific to town hall and facilities.
Councillor Souls.
With that, to spring off of that, the IDCA side of this, I think it's actually important that we find some end uses for that building reserve fund in that way. I think that in doing so, we will also be gaining more credibility yet with the province in how we're managing our asset base. And if, in a sense, you could have your cake and eat it too, because we remember those that we're dealing with 50-cent dollars in that world, 50-cent dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do some seriously upgrading of an old building at the same time. Let's not. Maybe one of those shiny buildings with all glass windows all over are the right thing for council chambers, and that too is something that we can be still looking toward at the same time. I think this is a very good scenario that we have. IDCA, we can't undervalue what it actually is. And the more that we keep that relationship, like here we've had conversation with the province over the years, and we've negotiated with them so that we could actually create some reserves, which is not what the original intent was for, and so let's now follow through and use some of these reserves in a way that is completely visible to the province and beneficial to our community, I see it as a win-win. It actually, like, think forward as far as IDCA. Originally, our intent was to have originally our value was a $10 million per year touch, and now we've had to take it back to 5. Well, we could keep leveraging it toward 10 again, because there's lots of years left in that IDCA agreement. We could leverage it that way if we see an economic turnaround that actually hits us, but only if we have been playing ball with the province as we go.
So I agree with what you're saying, Councillor Souls, and the 50-cent dollars are a big benefit to our community. But I think there's still the urgency to make sure that we spend these dollars wisely, and whether that course of action is, as you pointed out, whether to go and buy something brand new or to spend the money wisely on our existing facilities, which I think is my preference, and to make sure that all the funds that we have that we have jurisdiction over are spent wisely and carefully to achieve the goals we want, and to maybe not get a Cadillac, but get a very serviceable Chevrolet. Councillor Roper.
I just wanted to further Councillor Souls' points that the IDCA, if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing. And I think this would be a very good use for it. Absolutely.
So getting back to the original, Mr. Berry, go ahead.
Right, so just looking at getting text and emails, because we're from a reserve to question in terms of reserve balance. So ending balance by the end of this year would just be over $9 million in that account, projected at the end of 2020. And to add to the conversation on the IDCA is when we first went into the IDCA and got our first money in 2014, the intent was a new town hall, because that's when the emergency services building was part of the whole plan, et cetera, right? And we've communicated lots with the province, because when they look at a reserve balance, we have reserve balances for roads and water and sewer, et cetera, but each year we put some in, we spend a little, and we've been spending little snippets to deal with either upgrades, required upgrades here, or in other areas as part of renewal program in the other parts of the municipality. So we've communicated clearly with the province specific to, we've changed our direction based on the community, et cetera, that we're not looking at this big fancy emergency services building with a town hall attached to it down in the corner of Cordova Way. It's at options to reinvest. So the province is well aware, and that's given us the ability to build that fund, and now the next steps would be to utilize it appropriately based on council's direction.
So along that idea of appropriately, and if we continue to contribute to that fund, it's at $9 million now, and then it keeps growing year after year, we can utilize some of it to make sure that this building is serviceable, for the next decade or the next 20 years or whatever we decide. But that fund will keep growing eventually, and I don't know if this will be 10 years or 20 years or 5 years in the future. There will come a time where this building is no longer suitable for the municipality. We will have money in that fund, and we will have extended the life of this building without going overboard and trying to turn an old building into a new one. So as far as next steps go, Mr. Berry, perhaps it would be a good idea to have a meeting with council just around this subject, with Councillor Andrews present as well, to decide what direction we want to give Mr. McQuaid going forward. So perhaps we could have a special council meeting for this and to get into the weeds here of exactly how we might go forward.
Well, like what we'll do now is circle back with Craig and talk about what that will look like, and then.
Very well. Oh, Councillor Gerwin.
So the $9 million that's in that fund, that's for all buildings that the municipality owns, not just this building.
It's the buildings and facilities.
Yeah, right. So it's not just specific to this building. And then I guess I'm a little bit concerned, and I know we'll get there, but I think just some things that I'm hearing, I'm not schooled in the life of what an electrical system or an HVAC system should look like. So I would be relying on the consultant and staff to be making those recommendations, right? So I think that I would like to see council come to some sort of an agreement on what level we want to renew the building to, and then allow the consultants and staff to come up with the best way forward for that, rather than, I would hate to see it to come back to council, well, do we want this HVAC system or that HVAC system? Do we want this electrical system or do we want that? I don't, like, 'cause I wouldn't be able to make those types of informed decisions. I don't have that skill set.
I think, you know, if we go at this with looking at the goals, so I mean, we want to make sure that we heat and cool the building appropriately, and it would be up to Mr. McQuaig just to find the economical way to do that without us having to become experts in plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. And same with electrical, some options. These are the problems. This is what a solution could look like, and this is the cost of it, without us having to get into the weeds here on exactly how do we solve an electrical problem for Mr. McQuaig. I think, you know, he's the guy, or he's got the consultants that can do that for us. So, Mr. Barry, you had a comment?
I was going to say, yeah, we've had those discussions with also. The intent wouldn't be to have to come back for every decision to council to the single HVAC or dual HVACs to do with this or whatever it might be. It's more around council deciding what service level do you want this building to provide, and to what level and the time frame. And for us, we'll, you know, with either the consultant or with contractors involved, determine and help determine in terms of how to provide that service level to council. So example would be service level in terms of how do you want the streets cleaned, but we don't come and say which street do you want done first. We do it based on best practices, for example, right? So it's more around getting at that council at 25,000 foot level. Is, you know, do you want to reinvest in the building, and to what level, right? And then if you say yes, we want to, and we want the electrical to be up to code, then the electrical is done to code. And if the intent is that yes, we want to either stay in the building or reinvest so we can possibly market it at a later date, then here's the recommendations. Council passes this, say yes, with this recommendations from a broad perspective, and then the detail is based on advice and best practices from the consultant.
Any other comments, councillors? Very well. Then I'll declare our special regional council meeting adjourned. Thank you.